We're back. Season 8, episode whatever we're on. 8, the parent map. This is the episode in which Sunburst and Starlight go back to their hometown to meet with and interact with their parents and solve a friendship problem with their parents. I like the world building right off the bat. The postman comes in, gives a letter to the woman, she gives him a carrot. Nom, nom, nom. Postman sees that he has a letter for Sunburst, rolls his eyes immediately, knocks, waits less than a second, then immediately pounds, because he's done this before, right? Clearly accustomed to delivering to Sunburst. Then, of course, he gives him the another letter, waits for a tip, doesn't get one, and is just like, oh, whatever. First of all, that made me think of two things. One, that obviously what the episode is trying to convey, that the postman has been doing this song and dance with Sunburst many, many times. The other thing that it made me think of is, what if their post, at least the Crystal Empire post, specifically operates on a tip system? Like the postman, the income, the return on work that the postmen get is entirely based on the people they deliver for. Just food for thought. Anyways. Yeah, it's tips. Yeah, right. It's basically a waitress or a waiter, except a postman or a postwoman, a postal worker, right? Yeah, that system, you could see the logic in it, but it really relies on a lot of moving parts all moving the same way, and that'd probably fall apart immediately. Now, naturally, that could work in Equestria, since that's Equestria, but, you know. Anyway, so he has a giant pile of unopened letters. You note that they actually bothered to showcase that there is a wax seal on the letters, specifically so that we know that they are unopened. So that even at a casual glance, it's like, yep, nope. And then Sunburst is called to a mission. If it was at all debatable before with Surf and or Turf, it is no longer within the realm of debate that the map has expanded its retinue and can call on whoever the hell it wants to, since it's calling on Sunburst, who has nothing to do with any of this, with regards to the map. Still, with it, still love it, moving on. This then leads to a great scene. So Sunburst is talking, there's some comedy with Spike, which we're just going to step over for a second. Poor Spike. Starlight then tells Sunburst she's not enthused. You know, he's like, do you not want to go on a mission with me? And she's like, no. And he looks heartbroken for like just a second. That hits him like a ton of bricks. Just, he actually looks like he has an opportunity. Yeah, it's just, oh my God, poor Sunburst. But then she's like, no, let me explain. Sorry. I'm happy to go with you. I'm not happy about where we're going. Where are we going? To Sire's Hollow. Oh. And then his tone and expression immediately match hers. Yeah. This is actually a good direction for the show to go in. Filling in the blanks. This is one of those things you can do with regards to long-standing fiction. We've already implied that both of them have a bit of a troubled past. We know Sunburst was kicked out of maid school. We know that when Sunburst left, Starlight started descending and eventually ended up being a cult leader. So we know that there's some bad history there. So actually going into details is something you can do. All you have to do is not do the Star Wars effect. You know what I'm talking about. Anyways. So, okay. Let's fill out some gaps. Let's fill out some holes. This then leads to... we find out that both of them have an issue with their parents. Her dad treats her like a filly, a child, and his mother insists that he needs to always have a plan for the future. And then there's this great bit where Starlight, and I'll admit this episode made me laugh more than once, where Starlight says, okay, all we have to do is explain that we're on an important mission, get them to leave us alone. Do you think it'll work? Nope. Wonderful timing and delivery on that. So then they go in the gate. Welcome to... I forgot that. Sire's Hollow. That would drive me batty. I gotta be real. That would... ooh. Excuse me. A little tired today still. So, they get sprayed with the perfume. You know, you can get a fruit smoothie instead of actual fruit. All the shops have changed into a shopping mall. Okay. Obvious gentrification kind of a thing going on. The Development Society. We switch to the other half of the town, which is the Preservation Society, where everything has to be exactly how it used to be. I love the 100% pony grains, just like the town founders used, and it shows them with all their broken teeth. And there's this recurring gag of the fact that he just can't bite this. Yeah, no, that actually got another laugh out of me. Yeah, so we have this initial conflict, preservation versus development. Now, I was prepared to really sit and discuss this topic. We're not going to. But it does bother to show the extremes of both sides and why, as usual, both extremes are stupid. Because on the one hand, if you bulldoze everything for the future, well, that's nonsense, and that's extremely dangerous from a societal perspective and a personal one. But if you refuse to move forward in any manner, that's extremely stupid and dangerous, both on a societal level and a personal one. So they actually then pretty quickly show into them showing off their sides. And within the space of about a minute and a half, there's a really quick montage which says exactly what I just said. It shows how stupid both parents are being. And then the conflict is resolved. And I'm just staring at this like, wait, what? I'll admit, that caught me by surprise. Their issue is resolved at the 10-minute mark in a 22-minute episode. So that's just before the halfway mark. And I'm like, okay. Huh. Now, naturally, that's not the point of the episode, and I do think the episode's core point is a valid one. But if I ever needed to point to an episode of MLP that is clearly not written for children, it is this one. That's to say, kids. I've heard many people disagree and argue with the definition of a kids show. And I myself have mentioned before that I think that there's two gradients of a kids show. That there's something for someone who's 2, who is understanding concepts and permanence. And then there's something that's aimed at someone who is, a teenager or just slightly younger than that. And while this one could be argued to be the latter, it's very clear that periodically it is very clearly aimed at adults. Like this episode. There's no relatability for a child here. There's no relatability for a teenager even. This is for people who have bad relationships with their parents, which is 100% of the people I know. That's not a joke. I was actually going to ask you in chat, really quick, how many of you let me phrase this differently. How many of you have a really good relationship with your parents? Now, obviously, I can't really count that in the 100% I just mentioned. But the reason I mentioned the 100% is because, and I thought about this, 100% of the people I know, personally, in real life, are people who have issues with their parents, including me. Now, I'm more fortunate than most, but that still puts me at not terrible. I know, so my sister, for example, will never, ideally, never talk to her biological father again, to name one specific example of this. And I encourage and support her in that endeavor. And that's just one example of that, of which I can name probably closer to 3 dozen. Everybody I know has issues with their parents, right? And I don't mean, they like purple and we like pink. No, I mean issues. Now, I'm sure there is such a thing as people who have good relationship with their parents. And if you do, congratulations, because that's awesome and, in my experience, and I know a lot of people, very rare. But one of the biggest issues that is a recurring issue, well, there's actually 2. The others that we're not going to get into because that's a little bit too polemic for today. That's like 3 weeks from now. We got some time before we have polemic day. No, the main issue that I tend to see most often is that parents don't change their relationship with their children as they grow up. The nature of the relationship doesn't alter to match the fact that they're growing up. Now that sounds so duh, and the way they show that in this episode is pretty ham-handed. They literally treat their kids like they're kids. But I've seen this in real life, and experienced it personally. I'm almost 40, do you know that? Now, I'm not saying that to make it sound like I'm old. I've always said that I have the mentality of a 20-year-old even now, and that's still true. But I've been responsible since I was in the single-digit range. I was the one who actually took care of the bills, and the housework, and the cooking, and all that stuff, because my mother was too busy working, and it was just Mom and me. There's no real cause to treat me like I'm a child. And yeah, that's why I say this is the second most common thing I tend to see in these, again, personally, but also in others. And it makes sense, too. If we could leave the realm of judgment for a moment, kind of pull ourselves into a third-person perspective, it's easy to see why parents do this. Well, they don't really want to move on from that time when they were a parent, the so-called golden years, right? When their kids loved them and everything was awesome. And B, well, there's also the fact that it's hard for us to adapt to that. And the older we get, the harder it is for us to adapt to new mentalities. Now, this is not presumption. This is human psychology. The older you are, the more... Think of it like a chunk of wood. Hear me out. Your brain is a chunk of wood. And if you carve something into that, it's just going to leave a line. But if you carve that line over and over, it gets much deeper. That groove gets deeper, right? And it gets a lot harder to change that groove the deeper it's cut in. And that's how we operate, psychologically speaking. The more we pattern ourselves in a certain way, the harder it is for us to change that pattern, right? And so by the time you're already a parent, and then you have that, it's much harder for them to course correct and adjust and adapt over time to the fact that we're no longer 7. So even despite the fact that it drives me absolutely batty, it is nevertheless an understandable mentality for both reasons. And that is exactly what this episode hits in a nutshell. And again, it does it in a rather ham-fisted way, and it does it very overtly, but I have literally seen parents, I'm going to not name names on this one, who have treated their children, who are my age, like they treat their kids in this episode. Just, who's your that thing, right? Yeah. So I've seen this kind of thing in real life. Abso-frickin-lutely. There's also a couple other little tiny tidbits here that are kind of nice in their own way. There's this bit where Firelight actually functions pretty similar to Twilight at her worst. Did you catch that? Now that we've established the prehistory of this situation, we can start to establish the proper history of the situation. Stellar Flare also kind of acts like Starlight at her worst, very pushy and overt, and forcing everyone else to do things that she thinks is correct in order to try and solve the problem as quickly and brute-forcedly as possible. Which leads to another scene that actually made me laugh. Despite the issues this episode has, and it does have several issues, it made me laugh more than a few times, which is going to elevate the score, assuredly. But, oh no, I do not want to sell this. What a friendship problem. Like the whole bad acting thing. There's more bad... We keep having bad acting. I guess Celestia's been giving lessons. There's also a bit which got a real laugh out of me, and probably I'm the only one who really laughed at it. I found an old bylaw that nobody agrees on. Yeah. Oh yeah, actually I've got a picture of it up in my second monitor right now, Lord Harrimont. I'm going to cover it at some point. Pretty soon, actually. I don't actually have that much thoughts on this one, other than the big one, which I've already covered. I do like how Stellar Flare legitimately doesn't understand how the maps work. Which is interesting considering how many times we've discussed how the map works and the specific nature. And like we talked about that very recently, actually, with the kids who were sent in Surf and or Turf. That if they were told what the mission objective was, that would actually alter how they operate, and that would make it not work. So the map is very vague, but it's very precisely vague. And yeah, you, here, now. And that's the only 3 pieces of information given, which... Yeah, no, that's legit. I do love this map so much. I would give 3 positives to the map in MLP if I was rating this. Yeah, exactly. Stellar Flare thinks this is a video game, or a job, for example, might be a better example, because that's certainly where she's going with this. So, okay, so we've got... I kept your room the exact same it used to be. So let's look at this room over here, shall we? So we've got a poster of some kind of punk pony, and we've got, like a bunch of weird... There's skulls everywhere. A broken heart with an arrow stuck through it. She's got the heavy leather boots with the giant buckles, because apparently she's a Kingdom Hearts character. Eyeball just lying around randomly. The whole place is kind of a mess. There's this big skull metal guitar in the corner. with another broken heart, another skull. There's this dark unicorn with dark bat wings and dark red eyes, and just a pile of crystals in the corner, which was the thing that actually caught me the most. I love that because not only does that fit perfectly. Oh, she's also got a pile of crystals by her bed. Not only does that fit perfectly, but it explains so much, doesn't it? It's probably just done as a gag, but at the same time, Starlight going through a bad teenagerhood because of what she went through, and what she will go through, actually makes perfect sense. Is that goth, emo, or punk? That's punk. That's not goth. Goth is a little bit different than that. And that's too bright of a room to be goth. That's definitely not emo. Emo is much different from that. A lot of people confuse emo and goth, but emo and goth are almost on the opposite sides of the spectrum from each other. Emo would be an empty room with no decorations whatsoever, and maybe like a pile of hastily thrown together books of all the literature they've been writing, something like that. At least visually. Obviously, emo is more of a thing than that, but you get my point. Anyways. This is what happens when we don't rehearse. But yeah, no, we can see one of the reasons why Sunburst has his issues, and we can see one of the reasons why Starlight has her issues, because both their parents suck. I should point out that while I was doing some behind-the-scenes research on the making of this episode, which I always do for these episodes, I noticed there was a fan theory, which apparently is never disproven, that Starlight and Sunburst are siblings. I don't buy that. I think that if they're going to go that way, there would be different types of foreshadowing for that. But it's interesting to think about because the father of her and the mother of him is never even... Wait, I'm saying that wrong. The father of him and the mother of her, sorry, let's get that correct, is never even hinted at. And both characters are obviously have a pre-existing relationship and blah, 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 blah. But I don't buy it, personally. I could buy them starting to date going forwards and eventually getting married and making them, siblings in law, but that's completely different. And kind of weird. Anyways, so looking at my notes. There's some really good animation in this episode, as there usually is. They tell them, they finally explode. You're driving us crazy. The first thing the parents do is they have this reaction of pain. Hurt, injured. And that is immediately covered by anger. And as the anger fades, it just goes into grief. They literally run away crying. And God, isn't that accurate? That is pretty much the bog standard human reaction. Pain, anger, sadness. In that order. The anger masks the pain, but once the anger's gone, all they have left is the grief from the pain. And that is exactly what they go through. It's a very minor thing. I just wanted to comment on it because they completely nailed the presentation of that. This is when I have to give special praise for the NPCs in this episode. The book, bread, and perfume sellers. They're hysterical and probably the best characters in the whole episode. But my absolute favorite part is the big dude. Yeah, nope, we're over here. Don't worry, they can't hear us. Who would ever go into the antiques book? And he's just right there. Or, yeah, we think we should do this. And he goes to bite his bread. And he just sits there with his teeth trying to grind through the bread. And then, of course, there is the thing where they're like, oh my God, maybe our relationship with our parents is the problem. And he's just like, yeah, that's what we all think too. Yeah, the Baker Pony's great. Plus to the Baker Pony. Anyways. And of course, Starlight mentions, couldn't we have been sent to stop a war or something? Because she's out of her comfort zone. So, with 2 minutes and 40 seconds left on the clock, this is when they finally decide to resolve things. Let us discuss, once again on this show, the definition of a pat ending. A pat TV ending is an ending that is contrived and convenient and wraps everything all up with a nice, neat little bow with no consequences or anything, and, this is important, does so very quickly. If you've ever seen an episode of any show ever, Star Trek does this semi-frequently, where they're still in the crisis with 5 minutes left on the clock, you know you're in for a pat ending, or a to be continued, one of the two. And that is what this is, let's just be honest. This is a pat TV ending. It just ends a little bit too neatly and a little bit too quickly, which is a damn shame, because I do think the message of this episode is actually incredibly important. for the reasons already highlighted. Adjusting to your child growing up and having a developing, changing relationship with them based on that is a huge deal, and something more people should learn. Becoming aware of the fact that your parents still want you to be their child, their baby girl or their baby boy, that's kind of a thing that we need to acknowledge and accept as well, and we need to work with them on that as well, and so forth and so on. And so, like, that's a great message that doesn't really give the time it needs to breathe, because if you're paying attention, that gave it 9 minutes and 20 seconds for that particular beat to be pressed on in a 22-minute episode, and that's I mean, that's decent, but honestly, this is the kind of thing that a 30-minute episode can't deal with in general. We do get two little tidbits towards the end. Her dad wanted her to feel safe, which she obviously didn't. See the aforementioned picture and how she descended after losing Sunburst. And the mother, his mother, wanted him to be able to have a plan for the future after he flunked out of college. Excuse me, magic school. Both of those tiny little tidbits could have been expounded upon more, and I kind of wish they were, because both of those are very valid mentalities to slip into. So then they end the episode, the end. Yeah, they do care. As I mentioned before, these are not good parents, but I've known worse parents in real life, personally. I do like that the message that wasn't actually expounded upon, which is don't be bogged down with the past or the future, right? It's true. You look too much to the future, you look too much to the past, you have a problem. You do need to look in both directions, just not that much. Oh, and then the episode ends on a wah-wah, so we actually have to up the wah-wah counter here. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm torn on how to rate this episode. This is a weird one. Now, we've already talked about this author. We talked about him last time. He's, yeah, exactly, Trihexia. Mr. Rapp here, Dave Rapp, has not made good episodes so far. And the thing is, this episode has two incredibly important messages, themes, whatever you want to call that. One about, development versus preservation, which is a hugely important topic, which we could talk about for years, and we have. Or it could be, an episode about the developing nature between your altering relationship with your children and your parents, vice versa. But it's kind of not either. And I think that's what really drags it down for me, is that it doesn't really do what it could have done. I know that's a weird thing to ding an episode on, but my point is that while this is a funny episode, which it is, and it's an enjoyable episode, which it is, it doesn't have any weight or meat to it for me, personally. So it cannot be a purple. So somewhere between red and yellow is probably my range here. Honestly, I'm actually leaning towards orange, again, which would be his best episode so far. But I do agree that that this is good, but not as good as it could be. It's definitely an improvement, absolutely. And frankly, if it wasn't for those two themes, this would just be a straight-up, comedy fun episode, which is fine. But that puts it at orange, above average, right? Mr. Red, of course, thinks we should give it dark blue because we've already given him a dark blue. What did he write before? Newbie Dash, which we gave a green for. Flutterbrudder, which is a lamentation. And Where the Apple Lies, which was average. And Where the Apple Lies is a perfect example of an episode that was good and bad. That's why it was average. That's why because it had some really good points, and then it had some really, really, really stupid points, and that averaged it out a bit. Sorry, I was looking up what other episodes Dave Rapp has written, and I found someone else's analysis on it, which says the writer seems to have gotten better in every episode with his name on it. I mean, I don't agree, because he started bad and then got worse and then got better, but yeah, I could see that. Well, I'm seeing in chat several people who are leaning towards orange. And for that reason alone, I think I will go ahead and give this orange. That's 2 oranges in a row, which is above average and therefore good. Like I said, this was an enjoyable episode, and frankly, the NPCs, you know, the baker and all that, were actually awesome. Like unironically great characters. That was awesome. So I'll go ahead and give it to that. Next week, we have episodes I don't know anything about. Again, non-compete clause and the breakup breakdown, which I don't know what those are about, because I don't know anything. Before we cut off, I want to share a little bit of positivity with y'all, if you don't mind. One of the things that's been true for a while is that most of the time people tend to give negative feedback and not positive feedback. I've talked about this before. Now this is again just the nature of human psychology. Most people don't think to say good job. They only think to complain when it's not good. So like good is the standard and therefore shouldn't be commented on, right? And that's very normal human behavior. It's something I kind of struggle with as someone who entertains for a living, but it's something I kind of acknowledge. Hang on, I know we're getting into positivity because someone complained in a recent VOD. It was actually the rumination video on Mega Man 02 specifically, and that complaint was, and I quote, "When's the next MLP rumination? It's been 3 weeks." Now, that may sound like a weird thing to take as a positive, but that means that there is someone out there, at least one person out there, who has been sufficiently bothered by the fact that the MLP Streamination VODs have not been going live. Now, they will start going live again this week. It's pretty obvious why it didn't, between the surgery and then the delay with the hardware issues. The Streaminations kind of got delayed, and I don't like the Streamination VODs to go live when the video goes live. There's a little bit of a baked-in delay there. So this week, 2 weeks ago's episodes will start going live, right? But yeah, no, that's great. Knowing that someone out there is sufficiently bothered by their absence was something that gave me a smile this morning, and I wanted to share that with y'all. Anyways, moving on. No more streams tonight, obviously. No streams tomorrow. We never stream on Mondays. Tuesday morning, we will be back with Mega Man 03, which we will beat Tuesday almost assuredly. And who knows, maybe in the next day and a half, the rest of the Mega Man collection will be funded. Like Darth Tyron there. Tyron, hey, Tyron, you could put that towards the Mega Man continuation. I'm just saying. That could be a thing that could happen. Your $2 could be substantially more impactful if you put it towards Mega Man. And if you don't, well, let's just say we're going to have a bit of a chat. Thank you, as always, for the sub, Darth Tyron. I do appreciate it very much. Thank you. I've got that down for Tor, Jedi Knight. I'll see you around.